Hello and welcome back to the Nine Sports Podcast. My name is Kathleen and I host the weekly soccer edition of our show. I usually try to record on Tuesdays, but thought it might be worth it to wait for last night's U.S. Women's National Team game in Brazil. And wow, what a wild match. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the team's first matchup from over the weekend. I'll share a clip of Coach Emma Hayes talking with reporters after. And then we'll discuss some big picture takeaways from the road trip as well. Before we get into that, our number one at the 9, or our top story of the week, is also wrapped up in the results, but Sophia Wilson scored her first goal back from maternity leave on Saturday night. She was originally credited with a goal last night as well, but it was ultimately scored as an own goal against Brazil. And it seems like every week she is marking off another big milestone in her return, and that feels like a really, really positive thing for the U.S. and obviously the NWSL as well, as she makes her return to Portland. And just getting Triple Espresso back, I know there was a lot of excitement about that going into this camp. I think that they showed a lot of cohesiveness up there, obviously a lot of excitement in their own press conferences and appearances together. But you can find video of that goal and some of Annie Peterson's thoughts on that first game in Soccer Insider that typically publishes on Mondays. So she was right there in between the two games, but that's why we have this show to catch you up on the others. And I mentioned it briefly last week, but I hope you've enjoyed the first few weeks of Softball Insider as well. Marin did a great job diving right in ahead of the Women's College World Series and keeping us updated with all the action on and off the field. Definitely some drama there as well. But she's just been so much fun to read. She also writes for SI on softball, and so a super respected voice in the space. Definitely the person you want to be reading if you're trying to catch up on softball. Athletes Unlimited softball just started. We have women's professional baseball coming soon. There's professional softball coming in Kansas City starting next week, which I'm excited about. And I know they have teams everywhere as well. So lots of excitement for the stick and ball sports as well, if you will. But excited to see this kind of momentum hit other women's sports as well, even though we focus a lot on soccer on this show and basketball here at the Nine Sports. Lots of talk before these two games about Brazil, the team's physicality and toughness. I feel like those are kind of always the main talking points when we talk Brazil, and frankly, a lot of the South American countries. But Brazil is so familiar to us because of the number of players playing in the NWSL. Obviously, Marta, who is a legend in her own right. But you have their goalkeeper playing in the U.S. You have, players playing coast to coast, all different positions, all different ages. So a lot of familiarity on this team, which I feel like hopefully maybe added something a little bit for the fans, some of that familiarity, some other players to really keep an eye on that you have maybe seen in a slightly different capacity. And so again, the results weren't totally surprising. We knew it was going to be physical. We knew it was going to be tough. But I was still kind of shocked seeing the discipline report when it came through my email from US Soccer. There was a lot going on there, a lot of names on that injury report, 28 fouls, 8 red cards, including 4 on Brazil's coaching staff. Tarkan and Ludmila both received straight reds in stoppage time, and even Marta, as expected, jumped in there, even though she only subbed on in the 80th. She also jumped in there with a penalty, or earning a card. And then the kind of squabbles, I guess, that's probably too light of a term, but continued into interviews. They ended up on social media throughout the night and this morning. There was some criticism of the referees. Marta specifically kind of accused the head referee of wanting to be the star of the show. And just maybe making this not as much about the action on the field, but again, this was so disruptive, it was kind of hard to focus on the action on the field outside of those really, really hard fouls. In the U.S., did plenty of it on their own as well. There was a lot of give and take in this match, but far less affected by cards, which I think was a lot of that frustration from Brazil. Rose Lavelle, Lindsay Heaps, Claire Hutton, Claudia Dickey, and Emma Sears did each get a yellow. Claudia Dickey's was actually for time wasting, so that's, probably the least dramatic penalty of this whole match, aside from the coach and the really odd exchange about how he ended up having to wear a penny because his shirt color was too close to the U.S. jerseys. And then him getting a little sassy and taking that off and handing it back to the referee when he was escorted out of the match. But, we never want to see a game that ends with security on the field, especially armed security that looked so intimidating. But let's hear what Emma Hayes had to say about it. As you can imagine, she had a lot of thoughts to share with the media.
Oh, I love the pressure. And my players love the pressure, because otherwise, why play if you cannot take responsibility to be in these situations, to thrive, to cope with the demands and everything that come with that, to find joy from the beautiful crowd, from the noise, from Marta, a real legend. So great always to be close to her. And to stand there as a coach with such pride for my players, proud of everything, to deal with everything that comes with this situation, to win duels, to create chances, many chances, to score the only goal, to keep a clean sheet, to keep 11 players on the field, to keep coaches in the technical area. All of these things, I am so proud, because we are still a team that are coming together. And we had a lot of players who've never experienced this before. So this is what can happen when you have a growth mindset. And this is what can happen if you're not focused on the result. We're growing, and I loved it.
And I think that is such an important point from her about the growth mindset and how, she made a really big point going into these games and even against Japan earlier this year about how this team is still learning. They're still trying to figure out exactly who they are, exactly who's going to be playing. But there's so much value in these lead up games to get just the team together to figure out, who's going to be able to step up in these moments, to get those younger players some exposure to these really, really talented teams. And all the benefits, that she discussed going into this specific road trip, with them not being able to take road trips very often, or I guess maybe having the luxury of not having to make road trips very often, kind of a mixed bag there. And, she wasn't really subtle in her feelings about how the Brazilian bench handled it either. You hear there that she talked a little bit about, she was proud of herself for staying in her box, or how she was proud of her staff for doing that as well. And, I think that there are going to be a lot of discussions and a lot of things going on behind the scenes that she's going to be able to talk through with this team, especially a lot of those younger players. And a lot of those younger players did have really nice minutes in this game. Obviously, Triple Espresso was back, which we've talked about, and those are some of the most experienced players on this squad. Emily Sonnet had a ton of time out there and ended up taking a lot of those really hard hits. But for a player like Michelle Cooper, for players like Emma Sears, to be out there and to be running with this level of a team and facing that level of competition, I think is just going to be so valuable. And again, while that chaos kind of dominated the headlines, a few of the other things that kind of stuck out to me that I hope we're able to kind of get into those conversations as well as we get a couple of days, or even, I guess, we're still within 24 hours of this game. But the U.S. created a lot of opportunities here. They had 13 shots. They had 6 on goal. they also held Brazil without a shot on goal in this game after giving up those 2 goals in the first game. So a couple of big positives there. They're definitely creating chances. They're definitely suppressing chances from the other team. Negatives, though, I mean, the U.S. unfortunately didn't finish those chances. They do get the 1 goal, but kind of an odd turn of events there. Sophia Wilson with an excellent response in the spin and the shot. But that ends up going as an own goal. It did kind of bounce off a Brazil player and into the goal. And it did look to me like that did change the trajectory of the shot. So probably a fair call there. But ultimately that means, they didn't convert a goal in a traditional sense. And they had a lot of opportunities. They had a lot of balls really close to the goal. They had a lot of really solid crosses into that final third, into the box. But just getting there a touch too slow, taking a shot off maybe the wrong foot or having to kind of take an extra step to stabilize. Couple off of the frame. And so definitely they're going to need to focus on finishing. And I know that was kind of another thing that Emma had talked about going into this camp, was hoping that they could ramp up that scoring capability that this team has kind of built itself on, I guess, the last several years. Obviously, defense has been a focus as well. But this is kind of a high-flying, high-scoring team. The U.S., I feel like, has always been kind of known for that. And so it'll be interesting to see who they end up slotting into those forward positions, those midfielder positions as we get closer to the World Cup, and how they figure out where this production is going to come from. Because again, a lot of good opportunities. The ball is getting there, but it's just not finishing. And, maybe that is these players still coming back from injuries, from maternity leave, all these different things. Maybe it's a little bit of chemistry up front that getting everybody into that fall camp is really going to help with. We'll see. But I still feel like Emma is the right person in charge of this team. She is passionate. She's experienced. She seems to also just be a really calming presence for this team. And I think that that's something that really showed yesterday. Was I don't know that this team is as cool without her on it. And Trinity Rodman kind of joked about it on social and wanted us to applaud her for not being one of the ones getting a penalty last night, which I do think is commendable for her, because I would have absolutely assumed she was going to be one of the ones jumping in. Kind of how we joke about Sonnet being at the scene of all crimes. I do feel like Trin is going to be one of those to jump in and definitely fight for her teammates. So I will indulge. Congratulations, Trin, on not picking up a card there. But, the bigger benefits outside of, the direct action on the pitch feels like a productive trip. They, dealt with travel. They dealt with the routine changes. They dealt with the crowds in Brazil, which huge crowds, which we love to see, but definitely, not friendly, not the US crowds getting ready for them. And a country that is so eager to host this World Cup, and I think is going to do a really, really nice job with it. And one more thing that I do think is going to be really interesting is how things go when the NWSL picks up again. Obviously, I mentioned a lot of these Brazil players are on NWSL teams. I feel like about half that team is playing in the league right now and playing all across the league. And so hopefully, everybody gets some time to rest, heal up, and is ready to battle under a different patch come July and come back together in that league setting. But might be some real spicy group chats between now and then. And even when they meet back up, who knows? But that will definitely be interesting to follow in the fall. And again, as we just kind of ramp up the excitement on international competition. So make sure you head over to the9sports.com, THEIXSPORTS, where you can find all sorts of coverage from my team, stories on both games, takeaways, and more. And we'll be, catching you up on some of the other things that we've noticed from the NWSL, some of the teams that are rising to the top, people who maybe aren't quite making it, how teams are preparing for having men's World Cup teams in their cities, and maybe a couple of features too here during the break. But we are definitely not forgetting about the NWSL. And if you are one of those people getting all excited for the Men's World Cup and looking for some new friends to watch it with, I would love to point you towards the Shades of Blue Network. You might remember my friend Tom Baum, who joined the show a few weeks ago. He is one of their many fine representatives, and they will be hosting virtual watch parties throughout the World Cup. And I may even hop on there too. So definitely check out their feed. I will link it in the descriptions. Just such an incredibly fun group, and they really, I feel like, thrive on a live stream. They're so much fun to watch with. I learn so much every time, and as somebody who doesn't watch a ton of men's soccer, I definitely have a learning curve going into this tournament, but I'll be watching because it's just going to be exciting. I feel like, soccer has such a unique fan experience with the World Cup or the Olympics in those two different cycles, and it just takes over in such a cool way that I'm really hoping on social, on the live streams, and wherever else you're talking about it, that you're able to just really enjoy. And while you're at it, let me know who you're watching, where you're watching, and hopefully we can all kind of start building that community list of people to watch with and places to support as we prepare for the Women's World Cup next year. I will probably swing by the Women's Sports Bar here in Kansas City called The Dub. But I know that there are a ton of other women's sports bars, and it looks like they're all kind of planning on getting in on this big event. So let me know what you're thinking, where you are, and who you're rooting for, because I am not committed to a team yet. So let me know. That is it for today's show. Thank you so much for joining, and make sure you tune in throughout the week for more shows from the Nine Sports Podcast, including Maya talking hockey, Howard and Jackie covering the WNBA, and our new duo of Melissa and Michael talking college basketball. They do a lot of interviews with coaches and players, and just have a really fun new format to kind of add to our mix here. So I hope you're enjoying that show. Also check out Women's Sports Daily. It's your 5-minute morning show covering the latest headlines and talking points from across women's sports. It is on a separate feed, but you should be able to find it wherever you listen to your podcasts. And with so much going on right now between NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, soccer, women's basketball, everything else, it's just a huge lifesaver for me, who is constantly scrolling social media and wondering, which sport is this a reaction to? Lots of baseball content on my feed as well. And then sometimes it turns out it's not sports at all and it's Love Island. So I will see you next time. Thank you again for joining, and have a safe and wonderful rest of your week.